All right, welcome in everybody to Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Glen West, your senior writer here at the site. LSU is just a few days away from opening up its first transfer portal cycle here under Lane Kiffin. The Tigers have been working now for several weeks, putting together their board, having conversations with players on the current roster, and certainly looking around and kind of getting a feel for what they want to do when this transfer portal cycle opens here, so they can really hit the ground running. And we're going to break it all down. We're going to break it down by position. Going to give you some of my thoughts on the departures that have left to this point. Certainly, from a position by position standpoint, we're going to break it all down in terms of what the numbers might look like for LSU in the coming weeks and months. So we've got a lot to do today. But before we get to that, we just ask you guys, if you're watching on YouTube, to please subscribe, comment, leave your comments, and engage us on that platform. Like and subscribe. And then if you're listening from a podcast standpoint, whether that's on Spotify or on Apple or wherever you might be listening to us from, please give us the subscription over there as well, and leave us some comments. That always helps us out as we try to grow this network out to as many LSU fans as possible. So with that being said, at this point, LSU has as we sit here on Monday, December 29th at 8:30 a.m., 16 players who have decided to enter the transfer portal. I think over the next 3 days, you'll probably see even more as LSU kind of gets a little bit of a better feel for the where what number, how many numbers they're going to have to overcome in the transfer portal this year. I think that a lot of these guys have left are ones that could have probably been expected going in to this window here, where players are announcing that they're expecting to enter the transfer portal. And I think just right off the bat, it's important to mention that right now there is nobody in the portal. Like, these announcements that you see coming out every day from players across the country are just basically you know letting teams know outside of their own program that, hey, the expectation is that when this thing opens on January 2nd, we are going to be in the portal. So get in contact with my representatives, my agents, whatever, because that's what I'm leaning towards doing right now as a particular player. And so LSU right now has 16 of them in there. I think some of the more recent additions, you saw, Ori Williams, Paul Mubanka, and Austin Osbury go in. Those are guys that had at least from Mubanga and Ori Williams' perspective, some playing time this year. We'll dive a little bit more into like the specifics behind each position here as we kind of go through the podcast. But I don't get the sense that there are a lot of these guys that LSU has been clamoring to keep. I think one exception to that would be the freshman offensive lineman Carius Kern, who, if you go to the 24/7 Sports Transfer Portal rankings, is the number one offensive lineman, whether it's tackle or guard, in the portal, or expected to enter the portal at this time. So that's one that you hate to lose if you're LSU. I would expect that the Tigers still try to make a push there when the portal opens, and certainly before Kern officially enters his name and things like that. But right now, the expectation is that Kern will enter the portal. I think some of the other names, guys with starter experience, Tyree Adams, DJ Chester, Cohen Eccles, guys who have playing experience like Ahmad Bro. Certainly a guy like Juwan Johnson and Caleb Jackson have earned some playing time over their first couple seasons in Baton Rouge as well. But none of these guys were, maybe outside of Adams, or guys that started a significant amount of games for you, or were huge pieces to the puzzle here. And I think the common trend here is that a lot of these guys are on the offensive side of the football, and it for me at least shows that LSU is very much going to be in rebuild mode on that side of the ball. I mean, I think from a defensive perspective, you look at some of the names that have popped in so far. A lot of these guys are, were kind of end of the depth chart pieces, guys that maybe were not going to be starters if they return for next year under Blake Baker's defense. I think that they have a pretty good sense on that side of the ball of the kind of core that they want to retain. And I think you saw a lot of those guys play in the bowl game, the Texas bowl game. It wasn't the sharpest performance for those guys by any stretch, but now you have a whole off season to work with them and get them back in the and develop them internally. I think you're still going to look at several starters on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying from a depth perspective, from a numbers perspective, I think what Lane Kiffin looked at with this roster was and looked at with this coaching staff by keeping the defensive guys in place is that you were going to be able to retain more players on that side of the ball because you got Blake Baker back, you got Corey Raymond back, you've got Jake Olson and Kevin Peoples back. Those are guys that are very well respected by their players, and so and help get LSU to a top 25 defense this last year from an offensive yards perspective. So, or from a defensive yards perspective, I think that the major side of this that you're going to have to really figure out is on the offense, and I think that there right now you're seeing a lot of these players enter, and it's clearing house to some degree, um, resetting the boards from a depth chart perspective. You look kind of across the board right now at LSU's roster. They have right now, in terms of guys who haven't announced their what their future plans are. You've got one quarterback, you've got two running backs, you've got seven or eight receivers, you've got one tight end or two tight ends, possibly three, and then the offensive line has gone from 16 or 17 strong, now down to 10 or 11 here over the last couple of weeks, and so they're I guess the best way to describe it, maybe trimming the fat here to where they can now, start building this process back up and start building these position rooms back up. And so that's kind of where I wanted to start with today. It's just kind of giving you a little bit of an overarching thought of what I make of some of these departures, and kind of what that means here for LSU as they now enter this January 2nd window, where they're going to now start adding players and start bringing in and building up those rooms. And so when I did this exercise on our board, I did it in a piece form as well, just kind of breaking down the position by position numbers that I could see LSU adding to this in this portal window. I'll just kind of get the kind of the overall numbers out first, kind of on the lighter end, I think, which I don't expect to happen, but 17 is kind of the number that I kind of range from as kind of like the baseline number of additions that I think LSU could make this portal cycle, and then I could see them as many as 24 or 25. Like the 17 to 25 range is kind of the range in which I see LSU adding new players to the roster, and that will be mostly from a starting perspective. I think most of the guys that LSU targets here in the transfer portal will be guys that they expect to come in and compete for starting time right away. I think from a numbers perspective, there are certainly going to be position groups like the offensive line, potentially wide receiver or running backs for sure, where you just need more numbers too, on top of capable starters. You need some competition in there, some added competition. So that's kind of where the numbers, from a numbers perspective, I see LSU kind of at right now, somewhere in that 17 to 25 range. I don't think this is going to be like completely overhauling the roster where you get 30 to 35 guys in here and you just have to kind of fill space. Like I don't know that LSU wants to go that route. I know that the roster limits for the SEC recently were up to 105. So, you can certainly convert some of those walk-ons into scholarships as well. Guys that are already on the roster that are walk-ons for you. You can certainly add numbers too if that's the route that they decide to go, to get closer to that 105 number. But from a actual contributor standpoint, from a player perspective, where they want guys coming in here and immediately contributing to this 2026 team, I think kind of in the neighborhood of 17 to 25 is kind of where I sit. And so now, what does that mean by position? And I think you have to start with quarterback. That's the most glaring position of need right now for LSU. I think it's probably 1A, and then the offensive line is 1B. But we'll get to the O line a little bit later. But for the quarterback, for the quarterback, I mean, this is going to be the big fish that LSU is going to be that people are going to be really talking about with LSU, and just kind of which quarterbacks do they target. And I do think it will be quarterbacks, because right now all you have potentially returning is Michael Van Buren. And we talked a little bit with Van Buren after the bowl game on Saturday night, and he basically uh, re resaid a lot of what he told us, at towards the end of the regular season, which is that he wants to be here. He wants to potentially return to this program in 2026. He said he's had conversations with Lane Kiffin and the offensive staff and some of the front office personnel guys, Billy Glasscock, the new general manager, about kind of what his role or what that might look like for him next year. And so now he's going to go back into decision mode here. Now that the season's over, he's got 4 games under his belt as a starting quarterback at LSU. Certainly, you look at his first couple seasons in college, whether it's at Mississippi State last year or LSU this year, and some are out there curious as to why maybe he would want to return if he's not going to be guaranteed a starting spot next year. And my answer to that simply is that you'd be working with some of the best offensive minds in the country. You'd be working with some of the best scheme in the country, which is something that you have not had your first couple of years if you're Michael Van Buren. So that would leave a lot of opportunity there to develop as a player, and I think that's something that he'll seriously consider. And I think from a numbers perspective here, that's a guy you should want back in the program. I know that some of the games from him in the regular season, especially down the stretch, were not great. When he had those opportunities, he probably didn't make completely the most of them. But I think that was just one symptom of a much larger issue with the LSU offense this year, and to where nobody really looked good in the LSU offense. And so, I would personally want Van Buren back in this program, if nothing else, than to provide some competition, to push whoever is brought in from Lane Kiffin's perspective, and what he thinks might and who he thinks might be the best quarterback for that for LSU in 2026, and then potentially beyond that too, because you are going to have to add, I think, at minimum 2 quarterbacks, and that's kind of where we'll start here with the kind of breakdown by position. I think 2 quarterbacks is kind of where LSU settles in, especially if you get Van Buren back. If you don't get Van Buren back, I think a third comes into certainly it has to be considered for LSU. I think in that scenario, you're probably looking at a starting quarterback guy that you can bring in 2026 that you think would be a great short-term option, a younger player that maybe has several years of eligibility left that would be okay with sitting for a year, but still developing in your system, and then potentially competing for the job in 2027. And then maybe as a third possibility, you go out there and you find a quarterback at a lower level, whether that's in the group of 5 or the Division 2 or Division 3 or whatever, some guy that LSU, or Lane Kiffin and his staff thinks might have, some good tape on film, and just kind of be interested in wanting to bring them in to compete. I'm not going to make the exact Trinidad Shambles comparison, because there is no Trinidad Shambles comparison. That is a one-of-one story this year. But somebody in that same vein that's not going to cost you a whole lot, but you're enticed by their talent and enticed by what they could potentially bring to the table by developing in your system. And so, that was a complete shot in the dark probably for Ole Miss last year at this time, and it turned out to work really, really well. Turned out really, really well for them. But somebody else like that that might be at a Division 2 level, that could be a potential third option there if LSU really does want to build out that room that wouldn't cost you a whole lot of money either, to do that. So those are just kind of a few of my thoughts on quarterback. I think as we go down the kind of the depth chart here, and looking at needs, you go to running back. Certainly, you've got 2 guys in Harlan Berry and Caden Durham who have at this time not announced what their future decisions are. The new coaching staff, the new offensive staff, has already started meeting with some of these players. Harlan Berry being one of them, the running back for LSU, the freshman. I I have a hard time believing that LSU will lose both of these guys. I think if you're able to get one back, I think the most likely scenario is that you get Barry back. Of those two, of Caden Durham and Harlan Berry, I think Barry is the one that you look at and you say, okay, that makes sense, and why he could potentially return to the program as a sophomore in this system, and what they've done with running backs here in recent years. It makes a lot of sense as to why LSU would be able to get him back into the fold. He's coming off a performance in the Texas Bowl where he rattled off a 36-yard run on the very first touch of the game, then only got the ball again two more times. He fumbled once, and that certainly, I think, kind of limited what his production was like for the rest of the Texas Bowl. But he's somebody that has immense talent and a very, very bright future if he decides to return. Frank Wilson, the interim head coach, talked about that a little bit. That was probably one of the more important. No, I wouldn't say important. One of the phrases that he said was that he thinks Harlan Berry has a bright future here, and so look, that doesn't mean that Harlan Berry is for sure coming back, but certainly I think from LSU's perspective, they want that to happen, and so he can be a future pillar for you, but you still have to build out the rest of that room, which is why I kind of have, from the running back perspective, another 2 to 3 additions, depending on what happens with Durham or Barry. You might even have to add a fourth, but I think 2 to 3 is kind of in that range where you go out and you add several potential contributors. You add maybe a depth piece, a young player that is looking to maybe rise up a little bit in terms of a level of play, and certainly join a system like LSU's that is very catered towards the running backs and having success, especially in recent years with guys like Kawan Lacey and Kinshawn Judkins that they had at Ole Miss. There's a blueprint there for running backs to have success. And so as far as intel on what they could do at running back, I think Kevin Smith is certainly going to cast a wide net, but I think it probably starts with Lacey, the sophomore running back at Ole Miss. It's already been reported out there that Ole Miss is going to be very aggressive in trying to retain Kawan Lacey for next year for his junior season. But if he were to enter the transfer portal, certainly you would think LSU would be right there front and center, making one of the first calls to him to potentially get him back with a lot of his offensive staff that he just had at Ole Miss, guys he's still working with right now in the college football playoff with Charlie Weiss and Kevin Smith and all those guys that are certainly in Oxford right now as they prepare for the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. So he's an option. The running back position is one that we've written a little bit about over the last week or two. I think that there are other interesting options out there, but there will certainly be more in the days to come that LSU could pursue at running back. So you move towards wide receiver. I like some of the depth chart pieces that are currently on this roster. I would love it if LSU could get Kyle Parker back, if they could get Destin Hill back. Even a guy like Nick Anderson, I think, still has a ton of talent, even though he's been injured for the last couple of years. Teron Francis, the 4-star freshman that they just signed in the 2025 class, you'd certainly love to have him back. But they're certainly going to go out and add some starting level pieces, some contributing pieces in this passing game. One name that has been floated around once Ole Miss's season's over is Winston Watkins, a true freshman. He's caught about 25, 26 passes for Ole Miss this year as a true freshman. Very close with Lane Kiffin and the staff that's going to be coming here to Baton Rouge. So if he were to enter the transfer portal, that's certainly another option that LSU could turn towards if they so choose. I think that's one that makes a lot of sense. I think that for me, you're looking at probably 2 to 3 additions at the wide receiver room. That's kind of where I sit with where LSU is going to go at wide receiver. I think there's enough talent right now with what you have coming in as well. You have a couple guys, Jabari Mack and Corey Barber. They signed about 3 guys from the freshman class. You've got some guys that could potentially return next year. has more veteran pieces for you to round out the roster. But I think you're going to see LSU be pretty aggressive in going out and adding at least two contributors to the offense for next year, maybe three. But I really I think that's going to be that was maybe an undervalued storyline from this last year was maybe the receiver room not also not living up to the hype that was kind of put on them in the off season. And so finding some more proven players, some more experienced players at the Power Four level, I think is what you're going to see. Lane Kiffin and then George McDonald, who's the receivers coach, Sawyer Jordan, who's the inside receivers coach. I think you're going to see a lot of those guys really make big moves to try to up the passing game efficiency for LSU next year. At tight end, you've got obviously Trey'Dez Green coming back, and just watching Trey'Dez in that Texas bowl game have another really standout performance in a bowl game. He had one last year in the Texas Bowl as well. But just some of the catches that he was making, some of the plays he was making, it's so exciting to think about what Trey'Dez Green could be in this Lane Kiffin offense next year. I can't wait to see what that looks like. And so you got him coming back as your starter, your A1 guy, one of your top targets. You're probably going to be a guy that if that LSU is going to target a ton in the red zone, create lots of different opportunities for in the red zone, and really all over the field where he lines up. So very interested to see what Trey'Dez Green there. You've got JD LaFleur out there too, who's going to be a second-year player. He's been in the program for a year, kind of more of that blocking tight end kind of guy. They're bringing in JC Anderson, the freshman. That's makes three. You still got Donovan Green, who hasn't officially decided what he's going to do yet. He could potentially be a fourth. So maybe you add one tight end. Like I don't think tight end is going to be a spot where you see LSU completely revamp the room. Unless you lose both LaFleur and Donovan Green, then maybe you bring in two guys for depth or whatnot. But I just it's going to start and end with Trey'Dez. He's going to be a huge part of this thing, and tight end is a huge part of the Lane Kiffin scheme and the Lane Kiffin offense. So there is maybe a potential guy out there that enters the portal that LSU will want as maybe that second tight end if they don't feel like Anderson's ready or LaFleur is ready. That they'll go out and they'll bring in another veteran with experience to complement Trey'Dez. So one is kind of what I see for tight end. I think the big piece though to this, and we mentioned it right off the top, outside of quarterback, in terms of the biggest need, I think the offensive line is going to be what your biggest your biggest overhaul, and you're already starting to see it because LSU has lost six offensive linemen in the portal so far, are expected to enter the portal so far. I think when you look at those names, a lot of those guys had some starting experience for you this last year. Those are guys that certainly underperformed. It was not a great year for the offensive line, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of them go into the portal. I think some of it is, um, you know, money driven, player driven, looking for other opportunities. And then some of it's probably this new staff getting in there and saying, "Hey, like we'll take you back, but it's going to be for this price, or it's going to be for this." And some guys just probably are looking at their futures here and thinking, LSU is going to go out and go get, two, three, four starters, and then maybe a couple other depth pieces on top of that. Where do I kind of fit into this future here? And so I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these guys hop in the portal. Six as of now on Monday, December 29th. But I think that there's going to be really, really big additions. I initially wrote 4 to 5 as kind of my blueprint of impact guys that I think LSU is going to try to target in the portal. I could really see it bumping up to 6 or 7 now. It was just based off of some of the guys that have entered the portal, and maybe a few more are coming. We'll get more of a clarity on that here in the days to come. But that is a group right now that is going to be really, really, really challenging, in my opinion, to get the evaluation process right. Because what we know about the offensive line, what we know about offensive lines that work for teams that make deep playoff runs, is that guys it's a unit that very much is 5 guys working as one. And you saw that in previous seasons at LSU. Certainly 2023, 2024 kind of era with Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Miles Frazier, Garrett Dellinger, whatever you might think about that group as a run blocking scheme guys. They were elite pass blocking unit, and all of them were drafted into the NFL this last year, and did things and did some really good things while they were at LSU. And you saw the cohesiveness of that group really kind of translate year to year. They did not have that this last year. They just simply didn't have that in any respect. The guys were there was a lot of rotation going around as they tried to find the best five. They never really settled in on the top five that could consistently produce at a nice level for them. And so now you're going to be asking, if you're Lane Kiffin and Eric Wolford, the new O-line coach, Charlie Weiss Jr., the offensive coordinator, okay, how do we get this group playing together as quickly as possible, knowing that we have to have some pretty serious turnover here. I mean, right now, Braylon Moore, your center, is probably the one guy I feel best about, returning and potentially filling in that slot again next year. Outside of that, I couldn't tell you who's going to be on the offensive line next year. Like I really think there could be four new starters. At both tackle spots and at both guard spots. I mean, like, there's going to be nothing guaranteed to any of these players that return next year, and they're going to go be very, very aggressive in the transfer portal trying to bring in starters who can play. And so I think that the offensive line, and that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, because if you look, at least right now in the transfer portal rankings, you've got two four-star tackles that are listed as transfer portal prospects, and then you've got a bunch of guys that are three-star ranked players on the offensive line at tackle and guard. And look, I'm not trying to say that the 24/7 Sports ranking is gospel. I think the evaluations that Billy Glasscock and Lane Kiffin do internally, and Eric Wolford does internally, are going to net LSU some interesting pieces. And I'm just going to be very, very curious to see kind of what they settle in on at this position, because I do think you're looking at least three starters that you're going to target in the portal, potentially four, and then you're going to have to add some competent depth pieces on top of that. Maybe there's something internal here. Maybe you get a Solomon Thomas back, a Tyler Miller back in the program. You've got a couple of freshmen coming in, and Bryson Martinez and Ryan Murray, that they really like. So there's some interesting young pieces already in the program. If they can keep some of that talent here, I'm sure they would love it if they could have more conversation with Carius Kern as well about potentially not going into the portal, or going in and then coming back kind of deal. But they're going to have to add talent at tackle. They're going to have to add talent on the interior at guard, regardless of what you're looking at from an offensive line perspective. And that's going to cost. It's going to and it's going to be really, really important that those evaluations are on point on the offensive line this go around, because Kiffin has a great scheme. He has great deception and great creativity with what he does offensively. But if you have an offensive line anywhere close to what LSU's looked like this last year, it's just going to be really hard to kind of get the most out of your scheme next year. And so it's going to be really important for LSU to get guys in here that can be immediate contributors on the O line as you try to rebuild that group up and rebuild that offense up. So I know I spent a lot of time here on the offense. I think that's the side of the ball that you're going to look at the most here. I did kind of skip over some of the names on the quarterback side that I did kind of want to come back to here. I think you're going to see LSU be aggressive at quarterback for Sam Levitt. I think he just makes the ideal perfect fit for LSU in terms of what that 1-year starter could look like. I think DJ Lagway is a name that you're going to hear continue to be linked to LSU. I think that makes some sense in some ways, but there's going to have to be conversations on how exactly that might work, because he's not kind of the prototypical runner that Lane Kiffin's had in recent years at that position. I love Sorsby, the Cincinnati quarterback. I think he checks a lot of boxes for you. And so LSU is going to be big players. They're going to be communicating with all these top quarterbacks here to try to find the right perfect fit. Trinidad Chambliss, as of this moment, is still waiting on his waiver and what kind of decision that might look like for him. So that if he does get that waiver, then I think LSU would certainly circle back to him. But if he doesn't, then I do think that there are other really strong options out there right now at quarterback. And so you're going to have to add a really short term first year starter kind of guy. And then you look at, maybe another quarterback, a younger quarterback that has, that is developing, that is, potentially a guy that you could see in your system in 2027 and beyond. You recruit to that nature as well. So those are just a couple of my thoughts on the offense. Defensively, I don't think you're going to see as many additions defensively. I think you're probably looking somewhere in the range of 5 to 6 starters, and then maybe some complementary, depth pieces, some competition pieces, some rotational pieces on top of that. But with the defense, you have to start with the D line. That's where you're going to see the most transition, particularly at the edge spot. I think you could see anywhere from 2 to 3 edge rushers brought in by Kevin Peoples. That's a group that really is going to have to lock in and get the evaluations right, because you saw what the benefit of that was this last year. I know that the numbers at the very end, didn't really hint at a defensive line or an edge rusher group that got, made a ton of plays, but they created a lot of pressure for LSU this year. And I thought that they did a nice job, whether it was Jack Pyburn, Patrick Payton, Jamari Butler, Gabriel Relaford when he was healthy. And certainly you hope you can get him back into the program. A lot of these guys did nice jobs of applying pressure when needed, and getting offenses off the field this last year. I think on the interior defensive line, you're probably looking at, again, maybe 2 pieces, maybe even one. Like I think that they're going to have to make some sacrifices somewhere. Like I don't think that you can fill maybe every single need that you want from a starter perspective or from a key piece perspective. I think the defensive line could be one of those, because as of this time, you've got 3 really, really immensely talented freshmen coming in. You've still got Dominic McKinley on the roster. He hasn't announced what he's going to do yet. Walter Mathis is a second-year player who got some playing time this year. He still hasn't announced what he wants to do yet on the interior D-line for new hire Sterling Lucas. You still have a number of those first-year guys, Brandon Brown, Zion Williams. Those guys have not announced what their intentions are as of this time. So you could have some decent numbers at defensive tackle, but you're going to have to go in and add some experience, some starting experience. And I think that that's exactly what they will do, because you're losing Bernard Good and you're losing Jacoby and Guillory. Ahmad Bro is entering the transfer portal. There are some guys here that you're going to have to replace. And so, 1 starter minimum, 2 starters maximum, and then maybe another depth piece on top of that is kind of what I see the defensive line looking like, from a defensive tackle standpoint. So yeah, a lot of your additions I think are going to have to come on the defensive line, on the defensive side of the ball. You move back to linebacker. I think what's very interesting here is what happens with Whit Weeks. Does LSU get Whit Weeks back into the picture? And if he does, I think that majorly affects what LSU will have to do in the portal if he comes back. If he does come back, I think you're maybe looking at 1 addition, because right now you also have a lot of linebackers who haven't decided to enter the transfer portal at this time. Blake Baker knows that group backward, like the back of his hand. So I'm sure he has a pretty good sense of who's going to be coming back next year. Devon Keys, Tylen Singleton, Keelan Moses, Zach Weeks, Jaden Breaker, Charles Ross. Those are all guys who are kind of are going to be in their second and third seasons. And so, if you get Whit Weeks back and you get some of that internal development with guys that you've recruited, you could be set at linebacker. But, there's certainly also the possibility that they want to add a starter with some experience at that position. I haven't done a whole deep dive into what is available at linebacker right now in the transfer portal, but I think that, 1, maybe 2, and if Whit Weeks does leave, then you're really going to be, I think, looking at multiple guys that you bring in, some who will be, immediately starter contributors, and then other guys that maybe could complement your roster and complement your linebacker room in some kind of rotational role, but maybe you're banking on internal development there, also winning out. So that'll be a very interesting group to watch. The secondary, I think you have some really interesting pieces at the secondary already established. DJ Pickett, PJ Woodland at corner. You've got guys like Jakeem Jackson, Michael Turner, Aiden Anding, who are also cornerbacks for Corey Raymond going into next year, who haven't announced that they're entering the portal either. You might add maybe one, depth piece there, one guy that maybe is intriguing to you, because you also got a couple freshmen coming in. Havon Finney is a really talented freshman that could compete or get early playing time if he develops the right way. And then certainly you've got some young players in that room. And then at safety, Deshaun Spears, Tamarcus Cooley, those are kind of maybe your two top guys in that room. But again, safety is another room where I think maybe that's where you could see the more additions in the secondary. You're going to be losing AJ Halsey. They've lost a couple guys to the transfer portal already. Maybe you add one or two pieces at safety, a guy that can maybe fill that role by Halsey or be a third safety like they did with Deshaun Spears this last year, and bring in some contributors in that form or fashion. So I think maybe three, maybe four maximum between cornerback and safety combined. And again, you're going to have to make some sacrifices somewhere, because I do think a lot of the bulk of this group is going to have to be coming through the offensive side of the ball. You're looking at well over 20 additions, in my opinion. I don't think that they get to that 17, 18, 19 range. I do think you eclipse 20 in the transfer portal this year for LSU. So those are just some of my thoughts on what I personally am looking at here going into this new year, going into the transfer portal window, as guys that are numbers that LSU could target in the transfer portal at each position. I think it makes a lot of sense that you're going to be diving heavily into quarterback, offensive line, running back. I think those are maybe clearly the top three on offense, and then defensive line is going to be right in there as well to get that right, because you saw this last year what a strong presence on the defensive line looked like, even if they didn't always get home or always make the right play. I do think that more times than not they did, and it helped LSU be one of the more improved defenses in the SEC this year, and something for Blake Baker to really build on and sell to a lot of these guys that they're going to be targeting in the portal. So with that, we'll get out of here. We've gone a little long today, but appreciate everybody listening in. We're going to have all the coverage for you guys over on the transfer portal side of things, starting up on January 2nd. We got LSU basketball cranking up into SEC conference gear here. Maybe we'll hop on and do a podcast previewing SEC play sometime later this week. But you got that. And before you know it, baseball will be here too. So lots to do, lots to cover. Hope you guys stay tuned with us. But for now, thank you for listening and watching the Go 24/7 podcast.